Julie Hartman here. This is the Dennis Prager Show for Wednesday, June 28th, 2023. I am your guest host this morning. I have Dr. Matthew Schmidt on. He is a professor of political science at University of New Haven with a specialization or a focus on Russia and Ukraine. We are talking about this attempted coup that happened this past weekend in Russia. And I am going to ask Dr. Schmidt what this means for Russia, what this means for the war in Ukraine, and of course, what this means for the United States. But at least for now, we're trying to understand, with the limited information that we have, of course, what happened. So in the last segment, Dr. Schmidt was telling us that Prigozhin, who is I was going to say general, but Dr. Schmidt told me he is not a general, one of the leaders of the Wagner paramilitary group, led his troops into Moscow. This is after President Vladimir Putin allegedly sent a strike, if you will, into Ukraine, a deadly military strike, which killed several Russian troops. So we are now on Saturday, if I have the timeline correct. Prigozhin is marching into Moscow with his troops. What happens now, Dr. Schmidt?
So, first of all, I'll say I don't believe it was a coup. And most people, experts in my field don't believe it's a coup either. They take Prigozhin's word for it, which is it was a mutiny. And the end goal of that mutiny is still a little, opaque. But what happens is he marches into two cities in the south, and he gets to within 250 miles of Moscow, and then engages in a series of negotiations with the president of Belarus, like you said, with Lukashenko, and then suddenly stops and says that he's come to an agreement. He'll go to Belarus, and the troops in the Wagner company will be folded into the regular units of the Russian military. And the question is, of course, well, what was the negotiation about? We don't really know, but the British have put out what I think is compelling evidence that essentially what happened is Russia took people hostage, right? The Kremlin, Putin said, we know where your family is, and more than that, we know where the family members are of your commanders in Wagner. And well, now what are you going to do? And so this was a mafia-style, thug kind of moment, and Prigozhin backed down instantly. This whole thing lasted like one day, and said, okay, I'll go to Belarus, and we'll fold the troops in, don't kill anybody. And so far as we know, that's what happened. And he of course, never went into Moscow. And it's the belief that, this guy's not stupid. He knew he didn't have the troops to go into Moscow. And again, this is critical to understand, because the narrative out there is that he was critiquing Putin, and he was not. He was very careful never to do that. And in response, Putin never by name critiqued Prigozhin. And that was leaving open this area for negotiation. Prigozhin was critiquing General Gerasimov and the Minister of Defense Shoigu, and saying that they, may have been doing something that Putin didn't want them to do, right? They had attacked his troops. They were not supporting his troops, and appealing above them to Putin to right the situation.
This, among other reasons, many other reasons, is why it's so great to have you on, because I've been reading a lot about this subject. First of all, the Western media is calling this a coup. And second of all, the Western media is saying that this was the biggest challenge to Vladimir Putin's power in his 24 years in office, if you can even call it that, in office. Really, he's been an authoritarian. He has not been holding office. He has had a stranglehold on power. So was it the biggest threat to Vladimir Putin's presidency? Or was it not as big of a deal? Forgive me for labeling it that way. I hate to say that, because obviously any resistance in Russia is a big deal because it happens so seldom. Was this as big of a deal as the Western media is making it out to be?
Look, Prigozhin fired and downed several Russian Federation military aircraft and vehicles. And he marched to within 250 miles of the capital of the largest nuclear power on planet Earth. That's a big deal. It is a huge challenge to Putin. I think it has been his biggest challenge. But I'm not convinced that he's come out of here weaker. in the short term anyway. Look, I think Putin's weak in the long term, but in the short term, I think what he's shown is I defeated this thing in 24 hours. I have proven to anyone else in my country that is considering, right, any of these other oligarchs, that is considering supporting anybody else out there, that their families are at risk, and that I will do that, and that I'm capable of doing that because I still have the loyalty of the security services. And then the truth is, there's not a second Prigozhin out there. There's no one else who realistically could threaten the Kremlin the way he did. So I think for the time being, Putin is actually in a very strong position.
If it had all worked out for Prigozhin, what would have happened? What would have been his ideal scenario?
I don't think he ever wanted to be president. I don't think he ever considered that realistic. I think what he wanted to do was force the president to make the decisions he wanted him to make, which is to get rid of the defense minister and get rid of the head general and put in place a second general that was close to Prigozhin himself. And the thing to understand is that Prigozhin is brutal. He's an evil man, but he has, in that way, think of this like the mafia again, right? A sense of honor. And I think really what he wanted to do was to say, these guys who are prosecuting this war are not doing it right. And as a result, my men are getting killed. And as a result, the war is being lost. And I am taking this extreme move in order to fix that situation. And I think that's really what he wanted to have happen.
This is very enlightening. We will probably have to continue this question that I'm about to ask you into the next segment because you'll probably have a lot to say about it. But what meaningful effects has this march? I'm not going to call it a coup now, thanks to you. Has this march had? And also, why are they in Belarus now? Will they ever be allowed to come back to Russia?
Okay. So first of all, I'm glad you used that term. Prigozhin's term for what he did was called the March for Justice, which plays into what I was saying, right? That he's trying to create this just outcome for his men and for Russia. What is done in the battlefield in Ukraine is completely unclear right now. Let me use a metaphor of football. If your enemy team fumbles the ball but recovers it on the spot, it hasn't necessarily changed the strategic situation on the field. If they fumble the ball and you recover it on the spot, it hasn't necessarily changed the strategic situation on the field. I mean, you're closer to the goal in theory, right? But you may not convert. If they fumble the ball and you pick it up and you run it for a touchdown, now you've done something. There's no touchdown in Ukraine yet. There's no sense that the Ukrainian forces were able to convert yet. They could still do that. The jury is out because we're not clear about what's been going on with the Russian military in the last few days, but we haven't seen it yet. So far, this is a fumble that's been recovered on the spot and hasn't changed the game.